Here's what I keep circling back to. A man who did everything right loses everything anyway, and it happens because of a bet he is never told about. His friends arrive certain that pain like his must be punishment for something, and the God at the center of it all never explains himself. I am not walking through Job for answers. I am walking through it because it refuses to lie to me, and I want to learn how to sit with that. What undoes me is the wager he never hears. His whole world gets dismantled to settle an argument in a room he wasn't invited to, and still he blesses. I keep asking myself whether I want to know the reason, or whether knowing would only make it worse. Job lost 10 children and 11,500 animals in one day. He lived in Uz, the richest man in the East. 7 sons, 3 daughters, thousands of livestock. The Bible calls him perfect and upright. A conversation happens Job never hears. Satan tells God that Job only worships because his life is padded. God lifts the hedge. 4 messengers arrive back to back. Sabaeans take the oxen. Fire burns the sheep. Chaldeans seize the camels. A wind kills all 10 children at dinner. Job shaves his head, falls to the ground and worships. Naked came I out of my mother's womb, and naked shall I return thither. The Lord gave, and the Lord hath taken away. Blessed be the name of the Lord. He blesses the God who allowed it. The book begins with a man more righteous than the system that breaks him. Follow, chapter 2 gets worse. I used to think the friends failed by showing up. They didn't. For 7 days they sat in the silence and got it exactly right. The failure came the second someone needed to explain it. I've been that friend filling quiet with words nobody asked for. God admits destroying Job without cause, then hands him to Satan again. Round 2 of the heavenly wager. Satan says skin for skin. Take a man's body and he'll break. God lets him try with one rule: don't kill him. Job is struck with boils from his feet to his scalp. He sits in ashes, scraping his sores with broken pottery. His wife, who also lost 10 children, tells him to curse God and die. 3 friends arrive, see him, and don't recognize him. He answers her, "What? Shall we receive good at the hand of God, and shall we not receive evil?" Then his friends sit beside him for 7 days and 7 nights silent. It was the only thing they got right. The moment they spoke, comfort ended. Follow. Chapter 3 breaks the silence. He doesn't curse God. He curses his own birthday, which somehow unsettles me more. And then the line I can't shake. He was afraid all along. Even at the height of the blessing, he sensed it could vanish. The disaster only confirmed a dread he'd carried in secret. Job says men search for death the way miners dig for buried treasure. After 7 days of silence, Job finally speaks. He doesn't curse God. He curses the day he was born. He wants the date erased from the calendar. He envies stillborn infants and dead kings sleeping in their tombs. He calls the grave a place where prisoners rest and slaves go free. This isn't a prayer for healing. It's a prayer to be unmade. Then he names the thing underneath all of it. For the thing which I greatly feared is come upon me, and that which I was afraid of is come unto me. Even at the height of his blessing, Job was afraid. The disaster didn't surprise him. It confirmed something he had dreaded all along. Follow. Chapter 4. The friends finally open their mouths. Eliphaz isn't cruel exactly. He's certain. He even wraps it in a ghost story, so the verdict sounds like it came from beyond him. But I noticed the spirit never said Job's name. That part Eliphaz added himself and called it God's. A faceless spirit visited Eliphaz at night and made all his bones shake. Job's first friend finally breaks his silence. Eliphaz the Temanite, older, careful, respected. 7 days of quiet. He opens with a compliment, then slides in the knife. He reminds Job that Job used to strengthen weak hands and falling men. Now Job's the one fainting. Then the loaded question: who, being innocent, ever perished? The implication is unmistakable. Then Eliphaz pulls rank. He claims a midnight vision. A formless shape, hair standing up, silence, then a voice. Out of the dark it asks, shall mortal man be more just than God? Shall a man be more pure than his maker? There it never named Job, but Eliphaz carried that message straight to a grieving father. Theology delivered by ghost story. Follow. Chapter 5 sharpens the blade. He calls it chastening, a tutoring session, to a father still scraping his sores. I don't doubt Eliphaz believes every word, and that's what frightens me. Suffering must be earned. His whole world depends on it, even when the man in front of him is proof it isn't always so. Eliphaz tells a man whose 10 children just died that he should feel happy. Job is still on the ash heap, still scraping his sores. Eliphaz keeps preaching, quoting proverbs about fools and divine chastening to a man in active grief. He describes a foolish man whose children get crushed in the city gate, whose harvest the hungry eat, whose substance robbers swallow. Every detail mirrors Job's losses. Then he promises, trust God, and your offspring will be many, your tent secure, your grave full-aged. Behold, happy is the man whom God correcteth. Therefore despise not thou the chastening of the Almighty. He's calling catastrophic loss a tutoring session, to a father who just buried his entire family. Follow. Chapter 6 Job answers. What gets me here is that Job names exactly what his friend did to him. Showed up empty when the thirst was worst. I've been the dry streambed for someone before. We tell ourselves silence is neutral, but he calls it forsaking God. The cruelty wasn't loud, it was just absent. What kind of friends make a suffering man feel completely abandoned? Job answers Eliphaz. He's covered in sores, his 10 children are buried, and his oldest friend just told him he had it coming. Job says weigh his grief against the sand of the sea. It would be heavier. He begs God to crush him now, while he can still die innocent. Then he turns on the friends. He compares them to desert streams that vanish exactly when thirsty caravans from Tema and Sheba arrive looking for water. To him that is afflicted pity should be showed from his friend, but he forsaketh the fear of the Almighty. Withholding pity, Job argues, isn't just cruelty, it's abandoning God himself. The wager started in heaven, but the wound is here. Follow. Chapter 7 gets darker. I keep returning to the part where he asks God to simply look away, not to fix him, not to explain the wager he can't see. Just stop watching long enough to let him die in peace. I don't know what to do with a faith where being seen by God has become the torment itself. Job's skin is clothed with worms and God terrifies him in his sleep. Job 7, still on the ash heap, still scraping sores with broken pottery. Now he stops talking to his friends and turns directly to God. He describes life as forced labor, months of vanity, nights of tossing. He can't even rest. When he closes his eyes, God sends nightmares. He says his soul prefers strangling to waking up. Then he twists Psalm 8 into an accusation. Why won't you look away from me? How long wilt thou not depart from me? Nor let me alone till I swallow down my spittle. He's not asking for healing. He's asking God to stop watching long enough for him to die in peace. Follow. Chapter 8. Bildad answers. Bildad isn't lying about God being just, and that's what unsettles me. To keep his clean theology standing, he has to make 10 fresh graves into a verdict the children earned. I have held beliefs that required someone else's pain to make sense. I just never said it out loud to their grieving father. Bildad says a hypocrite's hope is a spider's web he leans on until it tears. Bildad is the second friend. The 7 days of silence are over. Now he speaks, and defends God's justice by indicting Job's dead children. Job just buried 10 kids. Bildad's logic is clean. God never perverts justice. So if your children died, they earned it. Seek God early, prove yourself pure, and maybe, your latter end will be greater than your beginning. If thy children have sinned against him, and he have cast them away for their transgression. Bildad needs the universe to be fair. That belief requires Job's children to deserve their graves. Follow. Chapter 9 is Job's answer. Job isn't denying God here. He's asking for a referee, someone who could lay a hand on both of them at once. That request stops me cold. When the judge is also the storm, and there's no one in between, what he's really begging for is the one thing the whole book seems to withhold. Job accuses God of laughing at the trial of the innocent. Chapter 9. Job's friends keep telling him the righteous prosper. He answers, how can any man be just with God when God shakes mountains, seals up the stars, and walks on the waves of the sea? Then he says the unthinkable. God destroys the perfect and the wicked alike. Same fate, same hand. Even if Job washed himself in snow water, God would plunge him in a ditch until his own clothes despised him. There's no court that can summon the maker of Orion. Neither is there any daysman betwixt us that might lay his hand upon us both. No mediator, no referee, a defendant facing the judge who is also the storm. Job isn't denying God. He's begging for someone in between. Follow. Chapter 10 gets darker. Milk poured out curdled like cheese. He's reminding God of the tenderness it took to make him, then asking why those same hands turned to tearing. I think that's the lonely, this question in the book. Not why suffering exists, but why it comes from the one who knit you in the first place. Job tells God he was poured out like milk and curdled like cheese. He's still on the ash heap covered in sores. His friends just told him he earned this. Job turns from them and speaks directly to God. He doesn't beg for healing. He asks why. You shaped me from clay. You knit me with skin and bones. You gave me breath. Now you hunt me like a fierce lion. Stack up witnesses, pile on rage. Why drag me from the womb just to crush me? Hast thou not poured me out as milk and curdled me like cheese? Thou hast clothed me with skin and flesh and hast fenced me with bones and sinews. The horror isn't that God made him. It's that the same hands that formed him are now the ones tearing him apart. Follow. Chapter 11 brings the cruelest friend yet. What gets me is how certain Zophar sounds. He's so sure suffering is a confession that he calls his grieving friend an animal, and we, the audience, already know he's wrong. I keep wondering how often I've preached that same confidence over someone's worst day. Zophar compares the blameless Job to a newborn wild donkey. Zophar, the third friend, finally speaks. He's heard enough talking. He thinks Job is a liar who actually deserves worse than what he's getting. His logic is brutal. God is higher than heaven, deeper than hell. You can't search him out. So whatever you're suffering, Job, it's less than your sin deserves. Then the cruelest line. A vain man wants to be wise, but he's born stupid as a wild donkey's colt. He's calling his grieving friend an animal. No there, for that God exacteth of thee less than thine iniquity deserveth. Zophar's certainty depends on Job being guilty, but we know the wager. Job is blameless. The whole sermon is built on a lie the speaker can't see. Follow. Chapter 12. Job fires back. Job says the line I can't shake. God owns the con man and his mark both. That's harder than atheism. It means the unfairness isn't a leak in the roof. It's the architecture. He won't pretend the world is just to make his faith easier. Job says the liar and his victim both belong to God. Round 2 of the debate. Job's friends just lectured him on divine justice. He fires back with sarcasm sharp enough to cut. Wisdom will die with you, he tells them. Then he turns to the real problem. Robbers prosper. Men who provoke God live secure. Meanwhile, the upright man, sitting in ashes with his skin clothed with worms, gets laughed at. Job points to the animals, the earth, the fish. Even they know who runs this, and what they know is terrifying. With him is strength and wisdom. The deceived and the deceiver are his. He leadeth counselors away spoiled, and maketh the judges fools. If God owns both the con man and his mark, then injustice isn't a glitch in the system. It's the system. Follow. Chapter 13. Job sues God. Everyone quotes the trust line like it's a white flag, but Job isn't surrendering. He's filing suit, walking into the courtroom against the judge who could destroy him. I never knew trust could look like a man demanding to be heard rather than a man going quiet. Job tells his 3 friends God will punish them for defending him. Job's comforters have spent chapters defending God's justice by blaming Job. Now Job turns on them. He says their defense is a lie and God will see straight through it. He calls them forgers of lies and worthless physicians. He warns that God will reprove them for showing partiality, even toward him. Then mid-speech Job pivots. He stops addressing his friends and turns to God directly, demanding a list of his sins in a courtroom. Though he slay me, yet will I trust in him, but I will maintain mine own ways before him. Trust here isn't surrender. It's a man walking into court against the judge, certain he'll be heard even if the verdict kills him. Follow. Chapter 14 measures a life. He envies a tree because a stump can drink and live again and a man just stays down. Then he asks the question the whole book leaves open. What unsettles me is that the first hope of resurrection arrives not as comfort but as a desperate maybe from a man in the dirt. Job says a dead father never knows if his children are honored or ruined. Still arguing from the ash heap, Job stops debating his friends and turns directly to God about the shortness of human life. A tree, he says, can be cut down and still sprout again when it smells water. A man cannot. He withers like a flower, lies down and stays down. Job envies the tree. He asks God to hide him in the grave until the anger passes. Then he asks the question no one in the book answers. If a man die, shall he live again? All the days of my appointed time will I wait, till my change come. It's the first whisper of resurrection in Scripture, and it arrives as a question, not a promise. Follow. Chapter 15 brings the friends back swinging. Liveth has found the perfect trap. He doesn't need to prove Job sinned, because the grief itself looks like a guilty plea. To suffer is to confess. I've watched people use that logic, and I've used it. It always frees the comforter from having to actually sit in the ashes. Liveth, as tells Job his own words, are the only evidence needed to condemn him. Round 2. The friends drop the gentle act. Eliphaz, the elder statesman, has been listening to Job's complaints. Now he comes back sharper. His argument is brutal. You speak vain knowledge. You fill your belly with east wind. You think you're wiser than gray-haired men older than your father. Man is filthy. He drinks iniquity like water. Then Eliphaz lists what happens to the wicked. Dreadful sounds, wandering for bread, fire drying their branches, and every detail mirrors Job's life. Thine own mouth condemneth thee, and not I. Yea, thine own lips testify against thee. Notice the trick. Eliphaz doesn't have to prove guilt. Job's grief is doing it for him. To suffer is to confess. Follow. Chapter 16. Job answers his miserable comforters. What stops me here is that Job accuses God and appeals to God in the same breath. He says God is tearing him apart, then says his witness is in heaven. I don't think that's confusion. I think it's what real faith sounds like when there's no one else to run to. Job says God grabbed him by the neck and shook him to pieces. Round 2 of the debate. Eliphaz has just accused him of hiding sin. Job answers and stops arguing theology. He starts describing what God's hands feel like on a body. He calls his friends miserable comforters. Then he turns to God. God tore him in wrath, gnashed teeth at him, set him up like target practice. Archers circling, gall poured on the ground, sackcloth sewn to his skin, face foul with weeping. And he insists his prayer is pure. He teareth me in his wrath, who hateth me. He gnasheth upon me with his teeth. Mine enemy sharpeneth his eyes upon me. Then something strange. Job says his witness is in heaven. He's accusing God and appealing to God in the same breath. Follow. Chapter 17 goes darker. He calls the worm his mother, and that line haunts me. Grief, when it lasts long enough, stops being something that happened to you and becomes the family you belong to. The pit moves in, and his friends keep insisting he must have earned the address. Job names corruption his father, and the worm his mother and sister. He's lying in ash, body rotting, and 3 friends still won't stop calling him guilty. He stopped arguing with them. Job just lists what's left. His breath stinks. His eyes are dim from crying. His days are extinct. The grave is ready. He's become a byword, the village joke. He tells his friends plainly that none of them are wise. Then he writes his own family tree. I have said to corruption, thou art my father. To the worm, thou art my mother and my sis. When grief lasts long enough, it stops feeling like an event. It becomes your lineage. The pit becomes the household. Follow. Chapter 18 brings Bildad back. Bildad never says Job's name, but every line is aimed at him. That's the quiet cruelty of it. A friend builds a sermon about the wicked and lets Job overhear his own obituary. I wonder how often I've comforted someone by carefully describing exactly what they're afraid they are. What does it mean when your comforter's sermon matches every detail of your life? Bildad speaks again. He's done listening, so he preaches on the fate of the wicked, and every line lands on Job. The lamp goes dark, strength turns hunger bitten, skin devoured by the firstborn of death, roots dried up, branch cut off, no son, no nephew, no name remembered in the street, brimstone scattered on the house. Bildad never says Job's name. He doesn't have to. His confidence shall be rooted out of his tabernacle, and it shall bring him to the king of terrors. Bildad thinks he's describing the wicked. Job hears his own obituary read aloud by a friend. Follow. Chapter 19 answers back. Everyone has left him, even his own body, and out of that wreckage he says he knows his Redeemer lives. What unsettles me is the timing. He doesn't say it after rescue. He says it buried in the ruin, with no evidence, while God still feels like the enemy. That's hope with nothing under it but God. Job's servant refused to answer him, and young children rose up against him. Chapter 19. Job's body is collapsing, his friends keep accusing, and now even his household treats him like a stranger. His wife can't stand his breath. He says God has fenced him in, stripped his crown, and counted him an enemy. His bones cleave to his skin. He escaped, he says, with only the skin of his teeth. Then he begs, "Have pity on me, my friends," and wishes his words were carved in rock forever. Then, out of that ruin, he says this, "For I know that my Redeemer live, and that he shall stand at the latter day upon the earth." Back in chapter 14 he asked if a dead man could live again. Here, buried in agony, he answers his own question. Follow. Chapter 20 swings back. Zophar's theology is airtight, and that's the problem. He turns Job's losses into a confession he never made, his suffering into the receipt for a crime. I keep noticing this is the cruelest thing anyone says in the whole book, and it comes dressed as truth spoken by a friend. Zophar delivers a flawless sermon about evil, and every word targets his innocent friend. Round 2 of the friend's speeches. Zophar goes last, and he comes in offended. His thesis: the triumph of the wicked is short, and their ruin is total. He gets graphic. The wicked man swallows riches and vomits them, sucks the poison of asps. His children beg from the poor. His house is stripped, his goods flow away. Every detail matches what Job has already lost. Then this: when he is about to fill his belly, God shall cast the fury of his wrath upon him, and shall rain it upon him while he is eating. Zophar's theology is tidy. It's also the cruelest thing said in the book so far. Job's grief becomes the proof of Job's guilt. Follow. Chapter 21 is Job's answer. What gets me is that Job isn't losing his faith here. He's losing his formula. He looked honestly at the world and saw the cruel die comfortable and the decent die in ash. I keep wanting suffering to mean something earned. Job won't let me pretend it always does. What do you say to God when the evidence proves your theology wrong? Job's friends keep insisting the wicked always suffer. Job, sitting in ashes, asks them to actually look at the world around them. He lists what they refuse to see. The wicked grow old. Their children dance. Their cattle never miscarry. They die rich and painless after telling God to leave them alone. Meanwhile, a righteous man rots in bitterness and never tastes pleasure once. One dieth in his full strength, being wholly at ease and quiet, and another dieth in the bitterness of his soul, and never eateth with pleasure. They shall lie down alike in the dust, and the worms shall cover them. Job isn't denying God, he's denying the formula. The dust covers the saint, and the predator the same way. Follow. Chapter 22 doubles down. This is the part I find frightening, because I catch myself doing it. Aleph needs Job to be guilty, so he simply invents the crimes. When my understanding of God demands someone deserve their pain, I'll manufacture a reason. It's easier than admitting the innocent really do bleed. Aleph charges Job with starving the thirsty and breaking the arms of orphans. Round 3 of the debate. Aleph, as the eldest friend, drops the hints and goes for the throat. He lists Job's supposed sins one by one. He says Job stripped the naked, took pledges from his brother for nothing, withheld bread from the hungry, sent widows away empty. None of it happened. Chapter 1 called Job blameless. Aleph is inventing crimes to match the punishment. Is not thy wickedness great, and thine iniquities infinite? When your theology demands a guilty verdict, you'll fabricate the evidence. Aleph needs Job to be a monster so the universe still makes sense. Follow. Chapter 23, Job answers. What unsettles me is how Job holds 2 things at once. He's sure that if he could only find God he'd be cleared, and he's terrified of the same God he's chasing. Trust and dread in one chest. I used to think faith meant the fear went away. Here it doesn't. Why does Job still trust God to vindicate him after God goes silent? Round 3 of the debate. Job stops arguing with his friends and turns to find God himself, to lay out his case in person, like a defendant chasing a missing judge. He searches every direction, forward, backward, left, right, nothing. The judge he wants has vanished from the courtroom, yet Job insists if he could just stand before God, he'd be acquitted. He's kept God's words closer than his daily food, but he knoweth the way that I take. When he hath tried me, I shall come forth as gold. Now read the last verses. Job is terrified. Trust and terror sit in the same chest. Confidence that God knows him. Dread that God won't stop. Follow. Chapter 24 names the crimes. Job names the victims out loud. The stripped poor, the seized widow, the nursing child torn off the breast, and then says the thing no one wants said. They scream and heaven files no complaint. I have no answer for that silence. Job doesn't either. He just refuses to look away from it. The murderer rises at dawn to kill the poor, then becomes a thief by night. Job stops defending himself and starts cataloging the wicked. He wants his friends to look at the actual world, not their tidy theology. He lists specifics. Men move boundary stones. They drive off the orphan's donkey, seize the widow's ox, strip the poor naked in cold mountain rain. They pluck nursing children from the breast. The city groans. The wounded scream. Men groan from out of the city, and the soul of the wounded crieth out. Yet God layeth not folly to them. That's the charge. The victims are screaming and heaven files no complaint. Job refuses to pretend otherwise. Follow. Chapter 25 is short and strange.